I thought I'd begin by telling how I learned of the Holocaust. My parents were at university during the Second World War, and like many students of the time, they got on floats and protested, burned effigies of Hitler and the sorts of things that students do. But it was far removed in many ways from what was going on in Europe. But they were also students of history. And as history students and people who lived through that period, although far removed from it, they wanted to ensure that their daughters, I'm the eldest of 4, learned about the Holocaust and about the dreadful things that world wars catapult nations into. But before that, when I was a wee thing, I was 11 years old, and I went to Woollahra Demonstration School. I was in the opportunity class, along with a group of kids from across the eastern suburbs. And in one of those streams was a young gal called Anna Katzman, now the Honourable Justice Anna Katzman, who came from a family who fled Europe. And also there was Evie Picker. Evie was in my class. Evie's parents were Jews who fled Germany into Russia. And of course in Russia, they were sent to a prison camp as Germans. In that prison camp, Evie's parents met, fell in love, as young people do. And eventually they came to Australia with Mrs. Picker's mother, who called herself Mrs. Winter. It was an anglicisation of a name that I never knew. But they were a family who played the piano accordion, loved each other dearly. There were 3 daughters in the family. We hurled across the forest tracks up in Blackheath in the Blue Mountains on our bikes. I remember Mrs. Picker, who never got used to Australian cockroaches, and when she saw one, she leapt on the chair and said, "Bertel, Bertel, get the shoe!" But they were my first understanding, a little, I think, of the love that endures notwithstanding terrible things. And then when I was 16, my parents took me, as I said, to Europe. And they took me and my sisters to Dachau, the first of the concentration camps. And they also took us to a war cemetery. We went in winter. And at Dachau, I have very strong memories as a 16-year-old of the black and white of the photographs in the museum, etched upon the black and white of the winter day that we went, and the snow. I remember walking in there beneath an arch that said, "Arbeit macht frei." Work gives freedom, or some other way of explaining it. There was also a memorial, made much later, of course, including an urn with ashes of an unknown prisoner, and the words, "Plus jamais," never again. And I remember the snow on the crosses in a war cemetery, where all the graves were in regular order, the recovered bodies of soldiers. It made a very distinct impression on a young 16-year-old from Australia with no Jewish heritage at all. But I've never forgotten. Never forget. Plus jamais. But never again. Never again. But as the motto of the Returned Services League of New South Wales reminds us, the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. And the undertone of never again is never forget. And so, Michael, when you referred to, I think I've noted it down, that forgotten issues beget forgotten people, which resonates, I think, with that observation. Never again is never forget. And that's where this museum plays such an important role. and where exhibitions of the kind that are opening tonight of a horrifying chapter of the Nazi campaigns help in that never forgetting. And throughout history, in all parts of the world, people with disability have fought to live independent and productive lives in a world saturated in stigma and discrimination. People with disability, like everyone else, all of us, want the right to be treated with dignity. And dignity, of course, is the essence of the international conventions, and most particularly the International Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability. The Nazi persecution of people with disabilities in Germany was portrayed, I think, so well in Michael's remarks. It began with an utter perversion of Darwin's principles of natural selection in aid of a very distorted, obscene vision of what an Aryan master race should look like. The various laws that led to that, which began with sterilisation, slipped easily under the Aktion T4, again that Michael referred to, into a secret campaign to eliminate people who did not fit. The strategies were supported by propaganda, justifying the sterilisation, and then the Gnadentod, the mercy killing, again to which Michael referred. Some of the slogans were these: Leben nur als Last, life only as a burden. Ist das noch Leben? Is this really life? And the other one that you referred to, Michael, Lebensunwertes Leben, life unworthy of life. Or another one, which described in similar terms that people with disability were useless eaters, consuming dollars that should be used elsewhere. And those labels were used as part of that insidious propaganda campaign that justified, behind the scenes, the gruesome reality of Aktion T4, which was a reduction of the street address where the department was that led this gruesome campaign, Tiergartenstrasse number 4. People in government and church-run sanatoria were first assessed. They had a code for the assessment. If there was a red cross, that meant death. A blue minus sign meant life, and a question mark indicated we needed to assess further. Lethal injection at first, but as the program proved so successful and seductive, it slid into the gassings through carbon monoxide delivered in the shower format that was a precursor to the next horrible, horrible, gruesome chapter of the Holocaust. But I think the horror sits most deeply when we realise it was medical professionals, after all, who were the ones who delivered this program. Medical professionals. Now, we have many in this room who probably would be medical professionals, academics and others, and I think the never forget element is one that we must take to heart. Meticulous records were kept. 70,273 were gassed, including 5,000 Jews. All Jewish mental patients were killed. The reports on the killings included the estimated economic savings of the deaths, economic rationalism and perverted psychology. The Nuremberg trials revealed that it was between 200,000 and 250,000 people, 250,000 people with disabilities who were murdered under the T4 and other euthanasian programs. The men, women and children murdered in the euthanasia program are among the most invisible of some 6 million murder victims. Invisible was your word as well, Michael. It is a most important element in the idea that I wanted to introduce, which is never again means never forget. Visibility is the essence of that understanding. But these issues are ones that can happen again. And I don't want to turn this into a very dark, foreboding narrative for the day. But I was intrigued in that 2008 convention, and I became acquainted with it quite closely when I led an inquiry at the Australian Law Reform Commission, which was on disability, capacity and equality in Commonwealth laws. And one of the key provisions in that convention is that people with disabilities have the right to recognition as persons before the law. In 2008, it was felt necessary to start that principal article, Article 12, with the right to recognition as persons before the law. Because in many countries today, still, the struggle of people with disabilities to be accorded dignity as persons is still an ongoing matter. Forced sterilisation continues. Interventions for people with intersex variations continues. The use of the word unfit is a haunting echo of the Nazi public health policies that was designed to eradicate unfit Germans. The Australian Human Rights Commission, of which I'm now privileged to be the president, is currently building on an existing body of work in a project that explores ways in which mechanisms to address and prevent violence against people with disability in institutional settings can be strengthened. The Nazi persecution, which this exhibition addresses in our Never Forgetting, reminds us at times about our own attitudes. And I think your reference, Michael, to euthanasia, assisted dying, reminded me when after the disability inquiry, the last inquiry I led at the Law Reform Commission was on elder abuse. And a number of the discussion in Victoria at the time had started about an assisted dying bill. And a number of the people that spoke to me during that inquiry were deeply concerned about anything that was assisting anyone to die because of the slippery slope that they perceived that they might be regarded at some time as useless, a life unworth living, or unworthy of living, to use the proper way it was done in the propaganda in the 1930s. So I have some disquiet about laws of that kind because of the echoes, the never forgetting of the time of which we're speaking tonight. The idea that somehow someone could be lesser and unvalued, and where and the impression, the way that I saw dignity in the context of the elder abuse report was seeing people as worthy individuals, having the dignity as persons, and not, as they often are, being seen merely as sacks of spuds, which was the only way I could reduce the contrast between the dignity that should be accorded and the way some people were treated, particularly in some nursing homes. The US Holocaust Memorial Museum has this quote: "In an age of genetic engineering and renewed controversy over mercy killings of the incurably ill, ethical and moral issues of concern to physicians, scientists and laypersons alike remain vital. The Nazi persecution of people with disability did not, after all, take place in a vacuum. Never again, plus jamais. Never forget. And in this place, the message is this: where history has a voice." This exhibition gives voice to a very dark chapter in the Holocaust. It is one that needs remembering so that we do not ever forget. I am very honoured to be here tonight to officially launch, if that is what is required, wet the baby's head, as one might do in my culture, I am very pleased to declare this wonderful exhibition officially open. Thank you.